Hi guys, welcome back to Humpday-Hangout. My name's Ellie.
And I'm Josh. And today we have a jam-packed show. First, kicking it off with UOW Associate Professor Teresa Larkin.
We will then take you down to Josh at the UOW Palestine Society General Meeting.
And finally, we're chatting to Willow from Uni Club Tabletop Society about their upcoming events and how to join.
But first, we're heading over to Kiara, who's discussing with Teresa about the week that was.
Thank you so much for joining us on Humpday-Hangout. And now it's time for the week that was. So taking a look back at last Friday, Labor announced that the Australian Bureau of Statistics will now be testing a question regarding sexuality after some backlash from the LGBTQ+ community when Labor went back on one of its election campaign promises to look into the questions being added into the 2026 census. So today, to talk to us about the 2026 census and this question being added back in is Associate Professor Teresa Larkin from the Graduate School of Medicine. Hello, Teresa.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good.
Thank you so much for joining us on Humpday-Hangout.
Thanks, it's great.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited to get into this chat and kind of understand this kind of question a bit because, yeah, as we'll get into, I'll just get straight into it sort of thing. It's quite important to understand the Australian population sort of thing. Just in general, why is the 2026, or just any census in general, important?
Oh, it's so important because it's just such a huge collection of data. So, it's really the most comprehensive data collection of Australia that we have. And that's where we get all the ABS statistics from. So when we think about the Australian Bureau of Statistics, which heaps of people will refer to even in their own research, but that also drives big decisions, that's where that data comes from. So important to think that, every 5 years, it's really the largest collection of data and statistics that we have. And so even though it's a one-time point, it actually allows us to look at how things are changing because it happens every 5 years. So, we get really important social, cultural, economic information on the whole population that we can only get this way. It goes to more than 25 million people across Australia. And to really isolated geographical areas or small towns and people, living on boats, places that general day-to-day researchers are not going to have access to. So it's really important that when we're gathering information, we gather as much data as we can because we get one chance every 5 years and that data will be used for so much.
Yeah. So to kind of circle back to the questions that were originally we wanted to have in the census was regarding sexuality, but also gender. So how could these sorts of questions, if they were both, for example, added into the census, how could that get a bit of an understanding for the government and how could they use that information?
So I guess the first thing is that the census is really giving us information about the diversity of Australia, and we want the true diversity, and people's gender, sex, sexual orientation is a part of identity. And one of the main things that the data is used for is about healthcare and the health workforce and health planning. And we know that gender and sexual orientation and all of those things, they play into that. So even if we just talk about the binary, which obviously we know doesn't exist, but in previous data collections of the binary, women are often underrepresented in healthcare. There's been marginalisation traditionally with different kinds of gender bias in healthcare. And now we know that that extends to people who are non-binary, people who are trans. So we need to make sure that we really stop the, health inequities that exist. And the only way we're going to do that is to get enough information about people. And people's gender and sexual orientation does affect their healthcare. It does affect how they approach health systems. But the main thing is that it enables planning in different areas of Australia. So it's one thing if we did a bit of a survey of, people living in a metropolitan area or something like that, and we took gender into account and sex. But actually this allows the government to look more holistically. Say, for example, there are people in rural, regional or remote areas of Australia who are trans and they're seeking gender-affirming healthcare and treatment. There may not be enough services in those towns. So it really enables us to look at the diversity, but put that in the perspective of thinking about equity.
And when we're looking at diversity in, those regional areas and things like that, obviously Australia is talking about testing, they've said now that they're going to test a sexuality question, but other countries have actually already implemented these sorts of questions in their version of the census.
Yes.
What have the kind of results been over in those countries?
Yeah, really interesting. So Scotland in 2022 and New Zealand in 2023. And yeah, they did ask questions about sexuality, trans health and things like that. And so they included a good range of questions. I think they had quite good options so that people could select instead of being this real sort of categorical. And it was interesting, I read that a really, a good researcher on LGBTQIA plus health and issues in Scotland said that the inclusion of the question was fairly uneventful, as it will be, it doesn't affect anyone what questions are included on the census. In the same way that there's questions about religion and language spoken at home, there's such diversity in those things. If you answer one thing, it doesn't matter what the other options are or what other people are answering. So I think it's interesting that, those examples of 2 other countries that have included that information, nothing happened. But what it does is it gives robust data. And when we only do this once every 5 years, you want to make sure you get that.
Yeah. And you also mentioned an interesting point that religion is included, obviously, in the census, and there's a broad variety of topics. When you're looking at the census, how does the combination of different, so say like different religions, different sexualities, how does that kind of help build an understanding of communities as well?
So important, that's really about that intersectionality. So thinking about, we've all got multiple aspects to our identity and that can be really complex. And obviously when we think about different traits, we've got people who are coming from sort of traditionally minority or marginalised or more disadvantaged groups. And then we've got people coming from groups that essentially have more power and have more privilege. And so each of those groups have their own needs and their own, preferences and things like that. But when you have the combination of multiple characteristics, that can have further compounding effects on, for example, healthcare. It's just a good example to use, and the way you approach health. So the thing is, when we get this data in the census, as a researcher, I've collected lots of data from things like from our surveys and studies. There would be amazing statisticians working at the ABS. And what they can do then is look at groups of people as a group, but they can also look at combinations. So for example, we might want to have a look at specific health impacts or health effects of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Then we might want to look at gender diverse people, but we also want to look at gender diverse Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders.
Yeah.
And I guess the biggest thing is that, just from even my experience with us collecting data, the worst thing is to regret not asking a few extra questions and getting a bit more detail, because it really allows you to go into the data deeper, and that's the only way we're going to understand the results and be able to apply them to affect people's lives, in real life circumstances.
Yeah. And, as the Australian Bureau of Statistics is currently, they're going to be testing the question regarding people's sexualities. Obviously, the wording of the question is quite important to make sure people understand what exactly it is that is being asked of them. What do you kind of think that question could kind of look like, and what are some of the challenges that they might have putting together that question?
Yeah, so firstly, I think it is important, it is absolutely important and essential that we have that question. We actually don't know the numbers of people who are gender diverse or, have variations of sex characteristics in Australia. So we don't have that data, which is a bit of a gap. So we need to have it. One thing that I think is that, sometimes we have in surveys, if it's sex, for example, it might say female, male, non-binary, intersex and other. And I think using the word other is such a problem. That's where the whole issue of othering comes from, when it's us and the other people. So personally, and obviously I'm not in the community, and I think that's one of the biggest things, is that we need to go to the gender diverse and sex diverse community and ask the people in that area and, the professionals and researchers, what terminology, what language is the most inclusive, is the best for asking these questions. But yeah, I think not having other as an option, maybe we could start with an umbrella, who is in, for example, the LGBTQIA plus community. I think it's interesting to know just that as a whole, but then to have options. One of the things that we do in our research is that we have an option that says prefer to self-describe, because that gives the person, empowerment that they can say, this is who I am, this is how I identify my gender or my sexual orientation or whatever it is. And the reality is, that's going to be a very small percentage. So it's not like the statisticians are going to have to go through every single answer. You know, the majority of people are going to tick male or female.
Yeah.
And then, but I think it's important to be inclusive and to look at other people who identify differently and to see how they identify.
And it's a bit of a shame because the two questions that they initially wanted to put in, but then no, now they're only going to be doing one. It's like looking at people's sort of sexualities and like preference for dating, things like that. So it is a shame that, like, I mean, I know there's still push and maybe there's still time for things to change, but people want to expand on that gender question because, like you said, it's only other. And I don't even know if you select other, is there like a line for you to even write in your own gender? Because I don't think that's the case. I think it's just male, female, or other.
I don't know. I know in the New Zealand and the Scotland one they had some options.
Yeah.
So yeah, I actually think if they're going to put something in about sexual orientation and, you know, preferences, then we really need to know gender diversity and sex diversity to build into that. So I do hope that they work with the LGBTQIA+ and the sex diverse communities and the researchers and the spokespeople and the authorities to get the most out of it. Because like I said, then you've got to wait another 5 years for this information.
I mean, it's such a big process and like obviously testing the questions and things like that. So like you said before, just to reiterate, it's important to get as much information as possible, you'd think. But
totally, make the most out of it. Make the most of sending this out to people on boats and making sure that everyone in Australia is covered. Yeah,
absolutely. And another thing that we were kind of discussing before coming on, like with Humpday-Hangout, it's looking at as well, say they do add both of these questions. At the moment, it's just looking like it'll be regarding sexuality. What's it going to be like for especially young people at home that are maybe in the family household answering these questions truthfully? Because some people might not be out, it might not be safe to do so. How would they take into consideration, you know, the fact that maybe some of these census questions aren't going to be answered truthfully?
I think all that you can do is to ask and that you will hopefully get as much data as you can and as much truthful data as you can. But I think that's the key to why it needs to be included in the census, because it's going to, you know, more than 25 million people. A few missing data points or a few errors are not going to matter. But if we sent it just to, you know, 10,000 people in a particular city or town or whatever, and you did have a larger proportion of people sort of not able to answer that truthfully, then it would have an impact. So I guess in the case of that, sort of the bigger issue is someone not being able to express themselves honestly in their own household. You know, I feel like that's actually the more important concern there than it affecting the statistics for ABS. And that's, you know, because there will be so many data points, having a few, you know, minor things, because from 25 million, you know, I can't do the math straight off, but however many people it would take to be 1% is still a lot of people.
And I guess in a way, even having that question on the census, getting sent out to all those households, it starts the conversation.
Totally.
So, you know, it might be that it like creates a discussion and then the person that might not be out in that household might actually, it just, like I said, starting that discussion and maybe opening
absolutely.
the doors.
And I think that's why it's also important, because people who identify with all of these diversities, they feel visible. You know, they've got questions that are about things that are their characteristics. So yeah, you're right. It's a conversation starter. I think that it makes it normalizes it for everyone. You know, everyone that's looking at the census is going to see, oh yeah, there's all these different options. This is me. It doesn't matter what everyone else is. And so yeah, I think it normalizes it. And like you say, it could be a really important conversation starter in some households where someone in that household might want to bring that up but doesn't know how to start.
And just to kind of wrap things up, I know it's obviously very difficult to tell, and we will hear from the Australian Bureau of Statistics how testing the question goes. Do you know, how is it going to look? Because like we've just kind of discussed, you know, even just sexual orientation, like not even bringing gender into the equation, there's such a wide variety of ways to identify. Do you think the best case is what you were saying before, having that like to self-express? Is that how you reckon the question might look?
Yeah, I'm not sure how it will look. I do think that it would be good to have an umbrella and then to go into the details. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And because there are sites, you know, like the Human Rights Commission and things like that, that have suggested ways of asking questions. So I'm sure that they'll work with them and come up with the best ones. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see now that it has been so spoken about. I think if they just worked with the right people from the beginning and put it in, I mean, it's kind of good that it is being spoken about.
Yeah,
It makes people realise, but
absolutely.
it could have been just as easy to have it go through. And most people, like they said in terms of the Scottish one, pretty non-eventful. It probably wouldn't have been on people's radars.
Well, Teresa, hopefully from here on out, it will just be uneventful. And
Totally.
It will be smooth sailings from here. Associate Professor Teresa Larkin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
On the week that
you.
was.
That was Teresa Larkin talking about the 2026 census. Now, across campus, we're heading to the UAW Palestine Society General Meeting.
A student general meeting is being held today by the Wollongong University Students Association, where students will vote on whether they think that the university should sever ties with the Israeli military. We spoke to Megan Guy, one of the lead activists and organisers of this campaign.
All across the country over the last 3 or so months, there have been emerging student campaigns to support Palestine, particularly to take a stand against the role that universities play in creating the kind of materials, weapons, defence materials that Israel needs to commit its genocide. So back in May at the University of Queensland, there was this really large turnout of students, over 2,000 students, who came to a student general meeting to demand that UQ cut ties with Israel. And since then, they've spread across the country. So heaps of campuses, Melbourne Uni, Sydney Uni, and now, UAW as well are going to be having student general meetings with a similar message.
Yeah, sure. And what is the significance of a student general meeting? What do you hope that it can achieve that hasn't been achieved so far?
Yeah, student general meetings are like the highest kind of representative body of students. So if we pass this motion today to say that students stand with Palestine, we demand UAW cut ties with Israel, and we oppose repression of student activists for pro-Palestine activism. If we pass that motion, it sends a very clear message that this is what students at UAW think. This is kind of the political position of students at UAW. And I think that's important because it's about keeping the pressure on the university, making it very clear that we're here, we're not going anywhere, we're going to continue to fight while there's a genocide going on for Palestine, and call them out for the fact that they're using research and money to go towards weapons and materials that are part of like the genocide in Gaza.
Yeah, can you just clarify exactly what the relationship with UOW specifically is with that?
Yeah, UOW helped set up something called the Defence Materials Technology Centre. That's run through like the engineering department. And they have a partnership with a bunch of companies that are involved in selling like materials and weapons to Israel. So those companies are companies like Bisalloy Steel, BAE Systems. There's companies like Thales, which is like a drones company.
Are you worried that the kind of same stuff will happen after the student vote, or what makes you think this will be different?
I think it'll be a really clear demonstration of just like actually how many students support Palestine, and saying that we as students, we are part of this institution. Here's what we want our institution to be doing. So I think, I don't think we're going to morally convince any of the people that run the university that they shouldn't put money towards things that are actually part of a genocide. But I think we can put a lot of pressure on them, and we can actually show, well, there's a, emerging movement, pro-Palestine movement on this campus and around the country, even around the world, and that's important going forward as well, I think, for pro-Palestine sentiment.
Thank you, Josh. We're now heading back to the studio with Neve, who's talking to Willow, the co-president of UOW's Tabletop Society.
All right, now to take a look at what's going on at UOW in terms of clubs, we've got Willow here from Tabletop Society.
Hello, hi.
Welcome, thanks for joining us.
No worries, thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your club, Tabletop Society. What does that involve?
Yeah, so we're just a general board game club, pretty much. We kind of have a sort of like a family board game night sort of vibe, where a whole bunch of people just like at our like events just bring a whole bunch of board games, and we just kind of play them up until like late and stuff like that. We just play a whole bunch of board games and a whole bunch of card games and stuff, and we just I don't know, it's generally pretty chill. We just kind of have a very relaxed environment, no big pressure, or like not a lot of like really big events. We just kind of, I don't know, relax, play some board games, have some fun. That's just our general sort of vibe.
Sounds so fun, yeah.
Yeah.
So what are the most popular games that you guys like to play?
Oh boy. So at the moment we have a few. We have like a crowd of people who just come in and like bring like their Magic the Gathering like trading cards. So they just play a whole bunch of games of Magic, pretty much. Just like I think like Commander specifically, which is just like a format within the game. They play that up until kind of like the event is over, pretty much. Besides that, we have this game propping up like recently called like Betrayal on the House on the Hill, which is like this like sort of dungeon crawling-esque sort of board game where you're going around and exploring a haunted house, and after a little while of exploring the haunted house, one of like the players kind of like turns into sort of like a traitor, and it becomes sort of like a game where all the rest of the players are trying to win against the traitor. It's kind of like 1 versus like, I think it's up to like 6 people. So 1v like 5, pretty much, just kind of like a lot of like strategizing, a lot of yelling, a lot of betrayal. That one's been fairly popular recently, and we also have like tabletop RPG nights, which is mainly like people come along and play like Dungeons and Dragons, sort of like one-shots and like host campaigns and stuff like that. And that's also been a fairly popular night as well. We've just been playing a whole lot of, we just play like a whole lot of D&D. We have a whole lot of game masters just coming on in and being like, I want to run this today, and a whole bunch of people wanting to play that as well. So we've got a lot.
Yeah,
we've got a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
Sounds super fun. So with Dungeons and Dragons,
Yeah.
do you sort of get involved with that yourself?
I've been involved with it, yes. I've been kind of like a de facto, just always coming into like game master a game just for like people who want to show up and play a game. I've been a bit on and off recently just because of like busy life stuff, but I always try to kind of like make it there. I'm kind of like a forever game master, pretty much. And yeah, I like to get myself involved in running like one-shots for people. But also whenever I can, I also try to like play whenever I can, because I don't always like running things. Sometimes I just like to play as well, and like be like a player and play a character and stuff like that.
What's your like go-to character? What sort of?
Oh, okay. It's kind of different sometimes. Like sometimes I run like a more heavy like spell, like using magic sort of class. I had a character in a campaign not too long ago where I was a druid who is like a wizard that like specializes in kind of like nature and turning into animals and stuff like
sick.
that.
Okay.
And so I played that character. Their name was Aed. I was like a druid researcher, just researching nature, and that was really a lot of fun. But also sometimes, like if I'm doing kind of like a one-off game or something like that, I will just I would just make like a completely stupid character, and I will just play that. I remember playing like on the spot like a really like drunk pirate like barbarian sort of character, where he was just like kept trying to hit people, and it just like wasn't working out, and just like every single time he would miss, he would just like take another drink or something, and it would just get worse and worse and worse.
That sounds so fun though.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Dungeons and Dragons, it's sort of like you get to, I think what a lot of people really like about it is you get to kind of like play like characters that you'd never really thought you'd be able to like do in real life. And I guess for me, that's just being a drunk pirate sometimes. Sometimes you just want to be a drunk pirate.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I love that.
Yeah.
And so for someone like myself who
Yeah.
doesn't really, I've never played Dungeons and Dragons or anything
Oh, okay,
like that.
yeah.
Is there, what sort of character would you recommend for like first time or?
Ooh, okay. So, I'll ask a few questions
Yeah,
now.
go
I'll be
for
the
it.
interviewer.
Yeah.
How much do you want to think about like using your character? Like, say if you're fighting, do you want to do you want to think a lot about like what you want to do, or do you just want to go in and like hit things and not think too much about it?
I like the idea of not thinking too much.
Like the idea of not
I feel
thinking
like-
too
yeah,
much? Okay,
yeah.
that's fair enough. Would you ever want to do anything with like magic or?
100%.
100%?
Yeah, for
Okay.
Sure.
And how much do you think you'd get into kind of like role playing and like acting out your character and stuff like that?
I mean, I think I'd get pretty into it.
You get
I
pretty
think
into
so.
it?
And
Okay.
check it on. Yeah.
Okay. I would probably recommend a paladin then. A paladin is a class which is kind of like very big and brutish and they hit people.
Oh.
But also they do have access to some sort of magic, not a lot. So you're not like thinking about what spell am I going to cast like too much, but also you have the option there. And also they're a really cool like role-playing class because their like background is that like they're a paladin and they have a sort of like oath that they need to keep to all the time, like kind of like oath of like, I don't know, like fighting for your friends, or just like very kind of like religious, or sort of like like loyal to your faction
Right.
sort of values. And
Okay.
if you really wanted to get like into D&D and like get into it, you can kind of like make up a sort of like faction that you would like to like go for, or sort of like rules for like yourself, and you can kind of like stick to yourself there.
Okay.
I think that would probably be a pretty good class to start from. Do you have like any idea of what you'd want like a backstory to be? Or
Look, I
anything
don't
like
know
that?
if we'll go that far
Yeah,
into it.
fair enough,
Paladin,
understandable.
Paladin, was it?
Paladin, yeah.
Paladin.
Yeah,
Sounds fun.
starting from that would be good.
So
yeah.
if someone wanted to get involved in the Tabletop Club Society, how would they go about that?
So I would say personally, the best way to go about it is just by following. We have our Instagram. I think it's just UOW Tabletop Society. We post there every so often, like when events are happening, if we do have any special events going on, and we also have a link in our bio that takes us to kind of like our other sort of sections. We have our QPay or rubric, I think it's called, like link where you can kind of sign up for events. If you can sign up your events and sign up, like put in your spot for events, or you can join our sort of like Discord server where we have a fairly active like community of just like people talking about what board games they're going to bring into our board game nights. People post some pretty cool art in there as well. And we just kind of like keep that sort of community with us at the moment. So I would say going to our Instagram and then going on from there, if you have like a Discord or if you want to sign up to events, is like a pretty good way to go.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned earlier the Magic the Gathering. Is that
Yep.
something you've got coming up? I heard
We do, yeah. We do have an event coming up. It is, well, earlier on this semester, we did an Intro to Magic the Gathering night, which was basically like for a $5 entry, you would come in, you would get a couple of packs of Magic the Gathering, like packs of cards, and then you would play them with all of the other people who would come on there, and you would like, we would have like teachers who would help like teach you the game and stuff like that. And that went really well. So we're doing another one in the beginning of October. I think we're doing a Magic the Gathering draft night.
Okay.
Draft is sort of a format where it's hard for me to sort of explain, even though I've played it a couple of times. It's like there's a whole pack of like 30 or so cards, and then like a few people kind of like grab 3 packs out of all of that and sit in a circle. They open up a pack. They take a card from it that they would want to use in their Magic the Gathering deck, and then they get the rest of their cards and they pass it along to the next person. And then you kind of repeat that process until all of the packs are done. You're sort of building a pack by taking out a card and just kind of like building them like one card at a time that way. And then after all of that is done, then you would go and use your deck and play against like other people and stuff like that. We are doing that event. It's going to be something like, so far, details aren't like 100% finalized yet, but like so far we're thinking of doing like $5 entry, and you get to join in for that like draft pack and like get those cards and play against people. And then you also get to keep the cards afterwards, So yeah, that's generally what we're doing at the moment. We have like a partnership with I think like the Good Game Store in Wollongong, the board game shop in Wollongong, and they're like helping us out with like providing packs and stuff like that. So it's all pretty exciting.
Yeah, awesome. That sounds so exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Willow.
No worries.
If you want to check out the Tabletop Society on Instagram,
yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in.
We'll see you next time for another episode of Humpday-Hangout.